So it's at 10:49 on my clock. I believe that Dawn Parzych is with us and about ready to join with herself and her screen. So I will read her bio. I'm not certain, but I think she may have been at DevFest last year, and if yes, I think I went to her talk and enjoyed it. The bio says, Dawn Parzych, I think I might be saying it right, or close, is a developer advocate at Launch Darkly, Dawn, where she uses her storytelling prowess to write and speak about the intersection of technology and psychology. She enjoys helping people be more successful at work and at life. She makes technical information accessible, avoiding buzzwords and jargon wherever possible. Dawn has spoken at DevOps Days, that's where I think I saw her, Velocity, Interop, and Monitorama. Wonder what that is. Her articles have appeared in numerous technical publications. When not writing or speaking, she serves as chapter organizer for Write, Speak, Code. So I have 10:50 on my clock. Hello, Dawn.
Hi, how are you, Karen?
I'm good. Where are you coming to us from?
I'm coming from Seattle.
Wonderful. Is it morning there yet?
It is. It's 8:50 here. So
Uh-huh.
I'm up, I'm caffeinated, and my husband has the child and dog sequestered, so hopefully there are no interruptions.
Very good. Is there anything more you would like to banter back and forth about, or are you ready to get going?
I would love to thank Melissa for her talk. I think I was listening to it, I'm like, that's part of my talk. Like, these go very well together. So I'd like to thank Melissa for like helping set the stage for what I'm about to go into, and for the organizers for like putting us right next to each other. That's great.
Okay, I'll get out of the way. Have at it, Dawn.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you for joining me this morning. As Karen said, I'm Dawn, and I am a developer advocate at Launch Darkly. And I'm also a big fan of failing. I failed my driving test the first time I took it. I've been laid off from jobs in the past. I also haven't gotten every job I've ever interviewed for. And while I'm very thankful that this talk was accepted for DevFest Wisconsin, I get way more rejections than acceptances. And I'm okay with that. I'm here to tell you today why you should embrace failure. So my question for you before we get started is, what is something that you failed at? I'd like you to drop a note in chat, go over to Vito, at me at Twitter, and tell me what is something that you failed at. Don't be ashamed of admitting that you failed. I mean, you just saw a minor failure here when I advanced a few too many slides. But failures don't have to be epic. These small failures are okay. Things like forgetting to mute or unmute while you're on a Zoom call, noticing a typo in a presentation while you're giving the talk. The more we talk about our failures, the easier it is to normalize and reduce some of that stigma associated with failing. Failure is common. We learn from our mistakes. I may have been a bit too successful in conveying this concept to my son. A number of years ago, he came up to me and told me that, Mom, I never want to, win everything. I never want to be on a team that wins. I want to lose. And I looked at him and I asked him why. And he's like, well, because then I'm not learning anything. I'll only be learning if I've made mistakes. So we've since corrected that, and he's okay with winning and being successful. So if failure is so good, why do we get that pit in the bottom of our stomach when we've made a mistake, or even think we've made a mistake? Unfortunately, even though failure is good, there are consequences if you move too quickly. Mistakes are going to be made, and when mistakes are made, there can be both financial consequences, or it can impact your mental and physical health. When things go wrong, when you're resolving an incident, so something's gone wrong, you have an incident, You may have higher mean time to resolve issues. It may more incidents you have, the longer it's going to take to resolve those incidents. And as that happens, customers start to lose confidence. And as they lose confidence, they leave. You're not able to sign new customers. And as an employee, you're tired, you're exhausted, you leave. And if you don't leave, you may end up burning out. Now, none of this doesn't sound very good. It sounds a little bit scary. So forget what I said about failing. Instead of failing, I want you to take more precautions, play it safe, never go out on a limb. But if we're doing that, like, you don't get that thrill that you get when you're taking a risk. And the rewards of taking these risks oftentimes outweigh that safe and sure route. So apply for that job. You may bomb the interview, but you may get the job, a promotion, a raise. Apply to speak at a conference. You may make a mistake. You may trip over your words. You may get a rejection, but you could also become internet famous and go on to become a world recognized public speaker. I like to think of failure and success as two banks of a river. And there's a bridge that takes you from the failure side to the success side. And that bridge is composed of knowledge and learning and understanding. You can't get from one side of the river to the other. You can't cross that bridge unless you're learning. I like to think of incidents using the Netflix approach. They call them surprises because this takes away some of that negative stigma associated with calling something an incident or an error. It's not a mistake was made. You were surprised. We were surprised at the way these components interacted. We were surprised by when the user clicked on this button, it ended up triggering an error. Think about what you're learning from these surprises and how you can take that knowledge, learn from it in order to reach success. And one of the things you need is a growth mindset. And Melissa briefly mentioned this in her talk as well. There's this great book by Carol Dweck called Book Growth. And in it, she presents two types of mindsets. You have a growth mindset, which is people that look at failure as an opportunity to grow. When faced with a challenge, they think that there's something to learn, that their knowledge and abilities aren't limited. It's not innate. It's not something you either have or you don't have. Contrast that with a fixed mindset. People with a fixed mindset think when they fail, it's due to something inherent in themselves. It's a limit of their own abilities, that your abilities don't change, that you have to stick to what you know and what you're comfortable with. Skills are not innate. You become an expert at something by practicing. There's this great example in the book where they talk about students that were broken into two groups and given a math test to take. And one group, as they were taking the test, were constantly told how smart they were, that they were getting everything right. And another group was told that, wow, they must be working really hard because they were getting things right. Now, the interesting thing was, as the questions got harder, the group that was told that they were very smart and getting things right gave up as things got harder. The group that were told that they were working hard stayed with it longer, got more of the more difficult questions right, because they didn't think that it was, I either know it or I don't. It was, I have to work hard in order to get this. To encourage growth, it also means we need to encourage failure. It's one thing to tell people that it's okay to make mistakes. It's a lot harder to create an environment where it is honestly okay to do so. Doug Rushkoff, in the book Team Human, says that human teams should be based on common hopes, needs, strengths, and vulnerabilities. We don't get that by enforcing shame, but by embracing openness instead. It takes time to build the right culture. And yes, you're going to make mistakes along the way as you try to create and foster this environment where it's okay to make a mistake. You're open about the mistakes that you're making. And when a mistake is made, people aren't shamed. So there are multiple elements that are necessary in order to create this environment. And the first one is this blameless culture, touching back on that quote from Team Human. A blameless culture focuses on where a system or a process failed. Instead of looking for a person to blame, there's an honest interest in examining how things can be improved. If you look for and attribute incidents to human error, you're assigning blame. I just finished reading the book Super Gifted with my son, and in it, there's this robot that is not behaving the way it needs to be behaving. And the group of middle schoolers that are building the robot are trying to figure out who's responsible for things going wrong. They were looking to assign blame. That wasn't good. So nobody wanted to admit it because they didn't want to be shamed and yelled at. So like we instill this in children. And so we need to kind of get away from this idea of a blameless culture. Instead of looking for blame, looking for like what's going on and trying to solve the problem. And I did say the first thing you need was a blameless culture, but a blameless culture cannot be created without psychological safety. So really the number one thing that you do need when trying to create this environment where failure is acceptable is this idea of psychological safety. Psychological safety is the ability to show up without fear of consequences. It means that you feel included, that it's safe to learn, it's safe to make a mistake, it's safe to challenge the status quo without fear of being blamed, embarrassed, or marginalized. You want employees and you want team members to empower them to speak up if things are going too fast, if they're concerned about why a feature is being built in a certain way, if they've identified a gap in a process. You need to feel that you're not going to be blamed when something breaks. Building this psychological safety requires empathy, open communication, and teamwork. This psychological safety is the foundation of being able to move quickly, being able to make mistakes, recovering from them, and learning from those mistakes. And one way that you can create this psychological safety and this blameless culture is to eliminate the word why from your vocabulary. Why is a word that we use quite frequently. There are problem-solving tools centered around the 5 whys. The problem with why is it's coded for explain yourself. And we learn this from a very young age. I frequently find myself asking my son, why did you do that? And I'm trying to change this, but it's hard because it's so ingrained in us. And the problem with why is this triggers an automatic defense mechanism in us. We think that there's a right answer and a wrong answer, and you want to give the right answer. And the answer to that question is going to impact the follow-on questions that are asked. Now, instead of using why, ask what or how. These questions promote concrete action, but you need to make sure that you're not phrasing your how or what question in a blameless way. Asking things like, what were you thinking? Or how could you make that mistake? Those not acceptable what or how questions. When people are asking questions, that's a good thing. We want to reward great questions. You want to make learning and curiosity a priority. And you have to figure out how to reward great questions. Now, telling everybody that asks a question, great question, good question. That's not rewarding good questions. That's just rewarding all questions. I want you to think about what are some things that you can do to encourage people to ask questions. And again, drop those comments in the chat. Now, it's not just about learning. We can't be learning all the time. We also need to release energy. So we also need to make time to play. Play shapes our brains, it fosters empathy, and it's at the core of innovation and creativity. Games teach us to be comfortable with failure. If you've ever played on a sports team, were you playing on undefeated teams all the time? If you've ever played a board game, a card game, do you always win? No, like we get okay with failing. I've seen my son progress from when he was younger. You kind of want to make sure kids win some of the time, and they're not always losing. But he's gotten okay with losing, and that's good. In the book Super Better by Jane McGonigal, she says it's hard to be vulnerable and ask for help with a serious problem. But it's easy to invite someone to play a game. I look at the rise in chaos days and game days, and I think this notion of playing a game, is involved in that. The stakes are lower when you're trying to find issues in a game context versus when sirens are blaring, everyone's asking, what's gone wrong? When are we going to have a fix? So that game context lowers the stakes. The consequences are lower. We're able to learn and make adjustments for the future. Everyone needs time to relax and unwind. If you're working too much, avoidable mistakes, not the good kind, will be made, which is why I encourage people to take time off. And not just take time off, unplug. Time off means don't check Slack, don't check email, do something not associated with a screen. So far, I've talked about why embracing failure is important generally. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and now focus on how this applies to when we're supporting and shipping software. But before I get into that, I want to share some stats. On a yearly basis, there is the Accelerate State of DevOps report that is produced, and it surveys companies looking for trends differentiating elite companies from low performers. And what's found in this study is that elite companies ship faster, but it's not just about that shipping faster, more releases and more deploys. They also fail less frequently. So when something goes wrong, they're able to recover quicker and they don't have as many failures. These elite companies didn't get to where they are because they didn't make mistakes. They did make mistakes. What they've done is they've learned from those mistakes. They figured out how to provide more value faster without sacrificing quality or the health of their employees. According to the report, these companies have fostered a culture of psychological safety. Sound familiar? And they've made smart investments in tooling. Now, I'm not saying you buy the right tool, all of a sudden you're like, great, we're not going to fail, we're going to be this great company. No, it's a combination of things. You have to choose useful and usable tools that work for your environment, for your culture. Some of the tools and processes you want to look at when there are failures is monitoring and observability tools, alerting tools, putting processes in place, like I've mentioned before, of chaos days or game days, putting procedures in place, such as feature flags to reduce load when your servers are overwhelmed. So think about where the mistakes and failures in your organization are occurring and ask yourself, what are some of the processes that are associated with its failures? How can we modify those? Is it a change in process? Is there a tool that we can be using? Do we maybe just need more people? You want to learn from those failures, or at least reduce the likelihood of them happening again. So some of the areas where you may want to modify your processes is during your build process. Failures occur when you're compiling code, when you're building. This may come as a big surprise, but releasing software sometimes results in failures. Using things like progressive delivery techniques can help you release features in a controlled manner by progressively delegating who sees those features and when. You can do canary launches. You can test in production. You can do targeted rollouts. There are a number of ways that you can change your build processes to minimize the failures that are occurring. Or maybe if you don't minimize the failures, you're minimizing the blast radius of who is impacted by those failures. What you also need is experimentation, because experimentation leads to new learning. So as we learn more, as we experiment, we learn how to avoid failures. So what does it mean when I talk about experiment? So the dictionary definition says an experiment is a scientific procedure undertaken to make a discovery, test a hypothesis, or demonstrate a known fact. So hypotheses allow us to learn. And looking at experiments in a software environment, we want to mimic science, because we do experiments in science. We want to use that same method that scientists use in the software that we're building and supporting. Science is about breaking things down into component parts, dissecting things to understand them. So you want to isolate a process. You want to, something goes wrong, you want to figure out like what's causing this error. So you want to isolate things. You don't want to necessarily look at too much. You don't want to change too many variables. You want to focus on a single thing. You want to form a hypothesis. You want to think about what is potentially causing this error. And if you form that hypothesis, you then want to create an experiment. You want to test it out. If I disable this feature, do the errors go away? If I reduce the load, do page response times go down? You want to look at metrics along with the experiments that you're running, because those metrics, as opposed to like a gut feel or I think, is where we get that data that confirms what we're doing. If we're making the right choice, is our hypothesis correct or incorrect? And part of the experimentation process is making sure that you can repeat the results, that it's not isolated. It's not, well, this only happened once. You want every single time an action is taken that you know what the results are going to be. And a huge part of experimentation is sharing your knowledge. Now, some people may think like, if I have all the knowledge, I've got job security. No, you don't want to be the one that's constantly being woken up in the middle of the night to resolve a problem. You want to have that ability to play and relax and take time off. And when you're doing those things, if you're the only one that has that knowledge, you don't have that ability. So share that knowledge, empower other people in your organization to be able to do what you do so that mistakes aren't made, that they're able to learn and grow as well. So when we're looking at what types of experiments we might run in a software environment, you might be doing some of these already, but not necessarily calling them experiments. If you're running a beta, that's potentially an experiment. You're collecting information, you're getting feedback from users, and you're taking that knowledge that you're learning from users and incorporating it into the product to improve it, to make it address your customers' needs. Another type of experiment is running an A/B test. You want to test different marketing copy, potentially. Do people click more if it says A versus B? Now, you can guess, you can just throw copy out there and hope it works, or you can run some tests. You want to, anytime that you're making a change, run a performance test. It's great to put a feature out there, but you need to know how that feature is going to perform and if it's going to impact performance in a negative way. One experiment that we ran at LaunchDarkly is we needed to add pagination to one of our pages. When you logged in to the LaunchDarkly platform, we would show every single feature flag that was there. And if you don't have a lot of feature flags, that was okay. But if you had a lot of feature flags, that page was taking way too long to load. So we knew implementing pagination was going to help in that area. But we also wanted to make sure that adding pagination wasn't going to impact negatively those users that didn't have a lot of flags. So we ran an experiment to look at how long the pages were loading if you had a lot of flags or didn't have, if you didn't have too many flags. Using that data, we made the decision that pagination didn't negatively impact users, and we launched it. So we got the results we were expecting, which was great. But if we hadn't done that, we may have encountered failures that we weren't expecting. So experiment and capture data. So at this point, I want to share with you 5 key takeaways that I hope you got from this talk. So 1, I hope you've learned from your mistakes. I hope you embrace a growth mindset. I hope you take time out to play. I hope you realize that the culture matters. And I hope you've learned that experimenting can lead to new knowledge. I'll leave you with one final quote. If failure is not an option, then neither is success. I'll share a link to these slides that have a lot of the resources. And if you would like a copy of these slides, you can go to launchdarkly.com/Dawn, download the slides, and also we'd be happy to send you a t-shirt. Thank you very much.
Hello again.
Hello.
Very nice job. Thank you. Very interesting. And we have 2 minutes. Would you like to take a question? There was a question that somebody entered in a chat.
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Okay. It's about 2 sentences long. I'm going to read to you. Someone in the chat says, the big aspect of failure in my life that ties into your talk as well is that I struggle with accepting constructive criticism as an opportunity to learn rather than a permanent high-stakes failure. Do you have any advice for people with that experience? How can we learn to take constructive criticism as an opportunity to learn rather than a judgment?
I think that's something we all struggle with. I would suggest reading some of the work by Brene Brown. I put a quote from her in here. She has two really good books. One is Dare to Lead, but first one is Daring Greatly, and it talks about vulnerability. And the struggling to accept constructive feedback is based on vulnerability, like how vulnerable we're willing to be. And she gives some really good examples of what vulnerability means and like how you can be okay being vulnerable. So I'd suggest checking out some of her work.
One of her quotes that I frequently refer to is "Done is better than perfect."
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, she's a great resource.
She is.
Yeah. So we have my clock now says 11:20. We have a break coming up. Dawn, is there any last thing that you want to say that you just now remembered that you want to say before we say thank you?
No, I am great. I appreciate everybody's time and enjoy the rest of the show. Check out some of the other talks and enjoy your weekend.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Nice job.
Thank you.